Part of that is because of all of the change that was taking place, but part of it was because of the economy. The 1920s, we associate that time period with a booming economy. Okay, we're going to look today. We're going to look at reasons for that boom. There are lots of them. Okay, it wasn't just one thing. There are lots of reasons for it. As we move on, all the things that made the economy boom are going to also be the things that make it bust. So in 1929, the stock market crashes, and that leads to the Great Depression. Again, all of the causes of the boom are also going to be causes of the bust. Okay, so the first thing we're going to look at is the post-war economy. Right in the very beginning of the 1920s, we're still in the post-war economy. In the very beginning of the 1920s, we're still recovering from World War I. We've talked about this a little bit before, and it's worth mentioning again. The economy of the 1920s doesn't really boom until later on in the 20s. In the first year of the 20s, the economy is actually really bad. You're going to have inflation. That means the cost of goods goes up, but people aren't making more money. That happens a lot of times during a war. You're going to have unemployment. Factories start shutting down. Soldiers are returning home. There's just not enough jobs. You're going to have just overall unease about the economy. People are nervous. They're not spending. They're not buying. You're going to have labor issues. You're going to have strikes and labor unions fighting with business. There's a severe recession. That means like a severe fall in the economy. That means that there's not a lot of production. It means that things have just slowed down. So you have a really bad economy in the first years of the 1920s. We're going to turn that around, but it's going to be only for the short term. Okay? It's going to be the policies that were put in place, as well as some of the things that were going on, were all things that were not sustainable to an economy to like grow in the long term. It was all like short term things. Okay, questions, comments. Is there something on here that I need to go back over? Can I move on, or do I need to wait? Okay. All right, so this is not a part of your notes. This is just something that I want you guys to see. How many of you have taken economics? Okay, none of you. That's fine. You don't have to take it until you graduate. Typically, kids take it their junior year, but you can take it anytime you're ready. Once in a while, ninth graders will take economics, but it's not something you have to take until you graduate. You will have to have a semester of economics. And economics is the study of the economy, okay, buying and selling of goods. And one of the things that you guys will look at is what a business cycle looks like. This is what a typical business cycle looks like. We have where the economy will boom, okay, it'll get really good, and then it'll get worse, it'll decline. Now we have things in place to try to keep the economy from getting into a recession. In the 20s and the 30s, we didn't yet. But the economy is like a roller coaster, okay? That's just typically what a business cycle does. It gets good, it gets bad, it gets better. It's like a roller coaster, okay? That's just what it does. That's just typically what it does. Now, during the 1920s, it's going to boom higher than it had before. And then it's going to bust and slump lower than it had before. Okay? All right, makes sense? All right, one of the reasons for the boom in the economy was new technology. There were lots of new things being made in the 1920s. This happened during the Industrial Revolution. This happened in the 1950s. This happened in the 1990s. There are new inventions. There's new technology. And we're going to talk about how people were able to afford it later. But if you guys will just know that all this new technology was a major driver of the economy. You're going to have things like the radio. You're going to have the washing machine, which washing machines back then are not like washing machines now. You still had to operate them. Like, you still had to, like, it wasn't like now. You had the refrigerator. Back then it was called the icebox, though. I'm sure that you probably have older family members that still say that. You're going to have the instant camera, electric razor, the airplane. The airplane's not going to have a huge effect on the economy yet, okay? But if you guys will just always connect new technology with the growth in the economy, okay? All right, questions, comments? Can we move on? Okay. So one of the reasons why the economy improved during the 1920s is because of the introduction of the assembly line. What this did is it made it to where products could be produced more efficiently. So say, for instance, a car. Instead of having one dude sitting and putting a car together, parts would be put on a conveyor belt, and they would just, like, when it would come to you, you would, do your part. Yeah, just like put a wheel on. Like, your thing that you do all day is you put wheels on cars. And it makes it to where it's produced much quicker. You can turn out more and more cars. What that does is it makes cars cheaper. Because the more of something that's in supply, the cheaper it is. Does that make sense? For this, if you'll just, explain what the assembly line is and put that it made products more affordable. Because cars are going to be the first thing that's going to be used or made using an assembly line. But eventually, more and more things will be put together using an assembly line. Sometimes you'll hear the phrase Taylorism. And basically that means like scientific management. And it's connected with the assembly line. Okay, you have questions about the assembly line. Now, cars are going to be the first thing, and it's going to be like the major thing of the 1920s, but just know that they weren't invented in the 20s. It's just they became affordable in the 1920s. The effect of the automobile. We'll talk about the cultural effects of the automobile later on, but I wanted to add in there the fact that one of the things that it did is it drove up the demand for other goods. It not only made transportation easier, but it drove up the demand for other goods. If you guys can think back to the Industrial Revolution and how the railroads made it to where people needed coal and steel and things like that, well, the automobile did the same thing. Okay, so the car, the Model T, which now people could afford, and we'll talk about that a little bit more, you're going to have the demand for other goods go up as well. Does that make sense? So that's definitely a test question of what consumer good made the economy grow the most. It's something along those lines, but just know that is definitely something you need to know. Is this what y'all have next? What do you have next on your notes? Okay. So we're going to come back to consumer goods here in just a second. I got kind of out of order on my slides, so we're just going to go out of order. One of the things that is making the economy grow during this time period is government policies. The government during this time period had something called a laissez-faire attitude towards the economy. That means hands off the economy. Okay? That means you don't regulate business, you don't regulate banks, you just kind of keep your hands off and let it do what it does. So let me explain a little bit how about the government and the economy. Congress has the power of the purse. Okay? Congress, they decide what money can be spent on what. The president goes to Congress and asks Congress for funding on things. And Congress, both houses, vote yay or nay. Okay? And typically Congress makes a budget and the president makes a budget, but when the president wants to spend money, Congress has to give that money. Now, what they'll do is they'll say, okay, I want money for, they typically do it like in a budget. So like, it's not like on a, hey, I needed this tomorrow. It's for 2019, I want to spend this on a new airplane, or this on that, or this on. So that's kind of how that works, and then Congress approves that. And then other things that you guys need to know is that as far as, that's government spending. But the federal government does other things to influence the economy. For example, the Secretary of Treasury decides what interest rates are going to be. Okay, they decide what interest rates are going to be. And again, going back to Congress, they also will not just decide spending, but like they decide taxes. They decide, I guess that's it, taxes and spending. But the president asks for that, and the Congress is yay or nay. Does that make sense to y'all? Okay. So back then, you had a party in Congress that felt that we needed to have our hands off the economy. That felt that, because Congress regulates banks and regulates Wall Street. They put laws in place to protect people. And during the Progressive era, we were passing all kinds of laws to protect people. But during the 1920s, we kind of scaled back on that. And during the 1920s, Wall Street and the banking industry were unregulated, which was good for the short term. As far as taxes go, the Secretary of Treasury worked with the president to come up with a tax plan, sent that to Congress, and Congress passed it. The Secretary of Treasury all throughout the 1920s was a man named Andrew Mellon. You can remember that name, Mellon, because that's a silly name. He believed in something called trickle-down economics. And this is actually what's being used right now. Okay? The idea behind trickle-down economics is that you cut taxes on the wealthy so that they'll spend more and that the wealth will trickle down to everyone else. Okay? So it's cut taxes on the wealthy and hope that they'll spend more money and they'll start businesses and hire people, and the wealth will trickle down to everyone. We used that in the 1920s. We used it in the 1980s. We are using it now. So we've used it in 3 different instances.